I'm asked one question more often than any other. Is the disruption caused by digital technology to journalism making the world worse or better? And my answer is yes. People have access to more news, but most newsrooms are shrinking. What's happening to our shared space, to the sense of common knowledge? I believe that what has disrupted us will now begin to save us. The audience will determine the future of news. In the old system of news, we had a group of responsible gatekeepers who could force-feed us the news they thought we should know. We trusted them because they were familiar brands with a track record. All the research about media over 100 years tells us that the media told us what to think about, but they didn't tell us what to think. Today, news is on demand. We can get the news we want when we want it. We're in control of our own learning. That means that we, to a greater degree than was ever true before, will determine what we know and think about global warming or gay marriage, the future of the planet. Our country, our world, will be more democratic, but it also means that it'll be less of the world that Edmund Burke imagined, in which our lawmakers and our officials could represent us but keep us at bay. For the news media, this has already had devastating economic consequences. New technology has fundamentally dissolved the old system for financing news. 75% of the classified advertising in newspapers 10 years ago is gone, vanished. Thank you, Craigslist. 40% of the revenue of newspapers, or newspapers have 40% less revenue than they had in 2000. Most of that has happened since 2008. The number of reporters in newsrooms, in newspaper newsrooms in the United States is 30% less than it was 10 years ago. The audience for network news, the 6:30 network news on ABC, NBC, CBS, is half what it was in the 1980s. However, despite these numbers, the notion that people are turning away from news is actually not true. I believe we are entering a new enlightenment. Before the printing press, it took a monk a year to transcribe one Bible. There were 122 books in the library of Oxford University. The first year after the invention of the printing press in 1450, Gutenberg's press printed 180 Bibles. Within 50 years, there were 35,000 new books that had been written in Europe. There were 10 million books in circulation. A key concept of Martin Luther's Reformation was that every Christian should know how to read so that they could interpret their own path to salvation. A 100 years after the invention of the printing press, the word fact first appears in the English language. Something analogous is happening today. though in fact the transition has been continuous. The telegraph in 1840, radio in 1920, television in the 1940s, cable in 1980. While the collapse of advertising model is obvious, and journalism is financially in a state of chaos today, the disruption is how we get news is more subtle and more promising, and this disruption holds the key to journalism's own reformation. In the old system, we consumers had to adapt our behavior to the news media. We had to be home at 6:30 to watch Walter Cronkite. We had to get up in the morning to get the morning paper, and we'd consumed our news in big gulps. The morning, a little bit at 6:30, maybe right before we went to bed. Today, the news media, and this is part of the disruption they haven't adapted to, the news media have to adapt what they do to fit our behavior, because we no longer have to fit our behavior to their cycles. That means that the news is more convenient. It also means that we can satisfy our curiosity whenever we want. We have the news in our pocket. We can answer questions as they occur to us. And people are as curious as they've ever been. People crave news. Today, 25% of American adults say they get more news than they used to. 10% say they get less. And on mobile devices, where the news is more convenient, 32% say they get more news than ever before. Half of people first hear about breaking news from television and then go elsewhere to get that news. 83% went to a second source, and half of those people went to a source that was a different platform. So they're not just sort of habitually going to the same place. And most of them actually go to familiar, trusted brands who they know have a track record. This notion that we are diving into only our own ideological puddles for information is actually not borne out by the facts. But the news today, or in the future, has to be presented differently. We have gone from what I call the trust me era of news, in which I would just watch Walter Cronkite because I liked him, to the show me era of news, in which the news media need to show me why I should believe what they're telling me. And the me in those two phrases has shifted from trust me, the media, to show me, the audience. In the show me era of news, the journalists need to show their work. They need to provide evidence, and they need to be more transparent in the way they deliver the news. Because a better version of the story is one click away. Now, the history of media shows that old technologies do not disappear. People thought when the camera was invented that painting would disappear. People thought when radio was invented that newspapers would disappear. People thought when television was invented that radio would disappear. None of those things happened. Each of those mediums adapted and actually got better at what they were good at. In fact, technology is bringing new audiences to news that probably would not have consumed news in older formats. Consider this. The average age of a print newspaper reader is 54. The average age of a newspaper reader on a mobile device is 37, 17 years younger. And the average age of a mobile-only reader, people who only get news on mobile devices, is 33. More than half of people 18 to 40 read a newspaper every week, but the majority of them do it digitally. This also means that the news of the future has to be presented differently. As I said before, it has to be presented when I want it. People have the ability to say, I'm here, what's going on? How many of you have ever had a fight over who was the dentist on the Bob Newhart show at dinner and gone online to find out the answer? The news of the future has to be designed to how we live our lives. What are you doing now? What do you need to know? What's happening now? And what's the answer? What's the question that people would logically have about it? Journalism has to now understand the rhythms of the audience. Through the day, we're now discovering that people get up, get on their mobile phone in bed, tragically, and want to know and are willing to read stories that were produced the night before. When they're at the breakfast table, people use tablets a little bit. When they're in transit, they use mobile phones. When they're at work, they're on desktops. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, traffic on tablets begins to spike. Around 8 o'clock at night, traffic on tablets really gets large. And the way we consume news varies significantly on different devices. Now, a smaller screen doesn't necessarily mean a shorter attention span. The reality is that the tablet has reintroduced long-form reading, long-form news consumption back into our lives, really for the first time in the digital age. For the first 15 years of the internet, people did not read long-form on computers. The average length on any one web page was 30 seconds. Why? Well, this device is a distraction machine with lots of input coming in, and your email pops up. Mobile phones, smartphones, are one activity devices, and Steve Jobs insisted that we have touch screens, which means that people are going to a few places that are familiar over and over. And online, and on tablets, people are reading long form. 73% of people who get news on tablets say they read long stories on them, and 20% do it every day. 70% of people who get news on their smartphones read long stories on them. It's what Jonah Peretti of BuzzFeed calls bored in line. You're trapped at the airport, all you've got is your smartphone, and you're not getting any good tweets. Technology is also providing significant new tools to make journalism better. Crowdsourcing, the ability of the audience, of you, to inform the journalism is exploding. At The Guardian in England, they call this open journalism. A reporter goes to Czechoslovakia to find out, the former Czechoslovakia, to find out what's being done to combat poverty. He puts a note on Twitter, posts on Twitter saying, I'm here, I'm going to be at this street corner. If you have answers to this question, come and meet me. And is able to do a series based on sources he never would have known that weren't in his Rolodex. A blogger says, I'm going to cover banking. I don't know anything about it. Educate me. And suddenly the audience becomes his teachers, also at The Guardian. The paper takes a photograph has a photograph of a protester in England who's been killed. The police say he had a heart attack. The Guardian asks if anyone worldwide has video of the moment that he died. A hedge fund investor in New York sees the post, checks his phone, has the video, and establishes that he was killed by police. Each of these new forms has its place. During a hurricane, citizen photographers can be many more places than the journalists at any one news organization ever could. But when the terror suspect in Boston is being interrogated, and there's 4 people in the room, we may need professional journalists with sources to find out what's going on in that room. The bigger challenge will be money. How will this next journalism be financed? There will be multiple sources. It will not be as advertising driven as our journalism was before. And we will pay for more of it. Consumers will pay for more of it. In much the same way as the first video we saw this afternoon. The thing formerly known as advertising will become tools to help us shop, compare, save. Local media will be allied with local businesses in a war against Amazon and Google to make sure that we continue to have stores in our communities. We won't have any more banner ads. That's a good thing. 450 newspapers today charge for digital subscriptions. None did 3 years ago. For this to work, journalism is going to have more value, be more convenient, work for you in your life, so you will actually pay for it. There will also be privileges to membership. The Orange County Register set up a system earlier this month in which if you subscribe to the newspaper, you get free tickets to the Angels games. Why? The Angels have 20,000 unsold seats every day. But when they're free, it's easy to go. The Angels make money on the hot dogs you pay for, and they're selling a lot. They're giving away a lot of tickets every day. There are measurable sources of new revenue. Newspaper circulation was up 5% last year for the first time in a decade. There was $3 billion in new e-revenue, marketplace, tools to help you do things, money that didn't exist a year ago. $3 billion, by the way, that's half of the size of the music industry today. There's a long way to go. But I believe that what disrupted the news industry will now save it. And that is you, the changing audience. The people who found Craigslist are now finding a better way to get news and are finding better news. But we still need the news to be trustworthy, to be reliable. There was an old saying, journalism is only good as the person who owns the printing press. Now, journalism will be as good as your curiosity. Those who understand the audience will thrive, and you will save the next journalism. Thank you.